Welcome back. Got another Masters of the Universe video for you today. We're going to take a look at Teela. And not necessarily just Teela. We're going to look at the links between Teela, the Green Goddess, and the Sorceress, and how this character has evolved quite a bit. So I thought the way to do this would be more of a chronological versus when the figures were released. So 2021 we get the Green Goddess in the Origins line. And for those that don't know any of the backstory on the Green Goddess, in the mini comics that came with the original figures back in the early 80s, she is the one who appeared and gave He-Man his magical weapons that protected him. Eventually, she was given a different skin color, and she was given the more Caucasian skin. Separate from her, in those same comics, was a blonde-haired Teela. So what the toy company did, what Mattel did, was when they released the first Teela action figure, which I have here, instead of just giving us the basic Teela figure, they gave us all the accessories that would make Teela become that same goddess that they had previously showed us in the mini comics, where Teela in the goddess had actually squared off at one point. So that's kind of interesting that they would do that. So, but if you weren't familiar with the mini comics and say you just grew up with the animated series, you would have never known that. So we'll jump forward here and we'll take a look at the figures more in depth. I just kind of wanted to cover some of the basics. And then we got the more modern version of Teela, which is from the Origins line as well. So part of Teela's story is that she is the daughter of the Sorceress and the adopted daughter of Duncan, the Man-at-Arms. And depending on which storylines you're following, whether it be from comics or from like the Classics line or what have you, some believe that she could have even been the daughter of Fisto, who in some of the versions is Man-at-Arms' brother. So, the Sorceress. The Sorceress and Green Goddess are actually originally the same character. At some point she was reinvented. Instead of a green-skinned, snake armor adorned goddess, she became a bird themed sorceress. But essentially they were originally the same character. Now it wasn't until Masters of the Universe Classics that the Green Goddess was given an actual backstory and a name, and her name was Shirella. And in the comics, it was shown that Shirella, who was an archer who worked with Hero, she was injured and got a blood transfusion from Mossman that gave her powers and turned her green. So that's one version of it. So I mention all this because I found it interesting when we get to the CGI Masters of the Universe series from Netflix that came out in 2021. Teela is a hand witch, and she's just kind of on the streets and working actually for Evelyn, who becomes Evelyn, and Cronus, who becomes Trapjaw. She's working for them when she learns of her lineage. And so in this point in the series, Teela actually becomes the Sorceress. So you have, if you're following along, you have the Green Goddess, who in toy form is both Green Goddess and Teela. Then you have the Sorceress, who is originally Green Goddess, but they changed her theme and made her the Sorceress. And then you have Teela, who becomes the sorceress in the new modern take. Very weird, very interesting. It is one of the more intriguing characters within the Masters of the Universe. And I like the lineage. I really love characters that are part of a legacy, and they're fulfilling their destiny. And we've seen in various versions where Teela, like in the Revelation series on Netflix, she's trying to avoid her destiny as a sorceress. So yeah, it's interesting. So let's go ahead and go in depth a little more with the actual figures. We'll go ahead and start with our vintage. In the original mini comics, she was actually blonde. In toy form and on the Filmation series, they gave her the reddish brown hair. So this is actually a pretty good example of one of the original figures. You got the arm rotation, head rotation. She has that spring at the waist. Legs are still on the rubber band, which makes them a little bit floppy, but this is actually a pretty good copy. I can make her stand on her own. I typically have one of these little stands available just to keep her upright, but this is a pretty good figure. And as you can see, we put the snake armor on her. Now she also came with a snake shield like the examples behind her, but I do not have it. Alright, so let's go ahead and we'll jump to her Origins version, where she gets all the articulation, just like the other figures in the line. You got the arms, elbows, wrists, legs. Now this one is one of the first versions, so it has those horrible knees that are all pointy. Some of the future releases, or later releases, actually, they changed this up quite a bit. And we'll compare it with the Green Goddess, because she has those new knees. Alright, so you got ankle rotation, pivot at the foot, and we'll go ahead and take this off. This is a very, very nice sculpt. Mattel did a good job with this. Good head sculpt. The likeness is great. She's got a mean look about her, which she should, because she's the captain in the Eternian Guard. Bit of a badass. Alright, so we'll jump back to the Green Goddess and we'll take a look at the figure. And we're going to take this armor off just so we can have them side by side. As you can see, same exact figure, minus those horrible knees. These have more natural looking knees that aren't quite so pointed. Let's put them side by side, as you can see. Yeah, just a very minty version of Teela. Alright, so let's put them back in the lineup. And let's look at our Origin Sorceress. Now, I was one of those who was never able to get the vintage Sorceress. It was just a little too pricey to find one that was worth having in my collection. So I was super stoked when this came out, because such an important character. I really wanted to have her represented in the line, in my collection, I should say. So this one, you can actually spread the wings out, which is pretty neat. Very, very good recreation of the original figure. All the added articulation is nice. Really like it. Really clean figure. So now, let's go ahead and look at our CGI version. Completely different take on the character. You're still hitting all those same beats, with her being the daughter of the sorceress, her being a magic wielder herself. But we're into a more evolved version of Teela than we had in the vintage and Filmation lines. So she has a staff. She has a removable translucent helmet. The figure itself doesn't really have a whole lot going on. Neat hair here. You can take off her wings. So you just have the arm rotation. You can spring back at the waist. It's a little difficult to do. You can turn the head, legs. There's no rotation at the ankles or pivot or anything. I will say the paint application just kind of seems a little rough on this one. But overall, it's a pretty nice figure for this line. Now you got to remember, these are $10 figures. These aren't collector figures. These are meant actually for kids. So I like the option to take the helmet off if you like. So you can do a full face shield. You can tilt it back where she's got the half, which is probably more what it's intended to look like, but it doesn't really sit on there that well. So it's an interesting dynamic here, having these very, very different looking figures, but having them linked so closely. They're almost the same character to some degree. It wasn't until later that they were fleshed out and became different characters. So that's a very telling aspect of the toy industry in the early 80s, that they were going to give us a female action figure for the He-Man line, but they weren't going to give us two separate characters. And even when they gave us Evil Lynn, she was essentially a repaint of Teela with a different head mold. Alright, well, let's try to get some measurements. We'll start with our vintage Teela. She's right at 5.5 inches. Put her back. We're not going to do Green Goddess because it's the same exact figure as our standard Origins Teela. So let's see where she comes in at. She's also right at that 5.5 inches. So Sorceress with her headgear, also 5.5 inches. And our CGI Teela / Sorceress, she's about 5.25 inches. So she's the smallest of the bunch. Alright, so I hope you found this as interesting as I do. I'm a nerd for that kind of thing. I really like the backstories and getting the history on these characters and how they're all linked and how the toys were developed. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. You guys have a great day. I appreciate you watching. Thanks.